Go.
Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Sharon Kyle here with my husband, Dick Price,
Hello, sugar.
co-founder of the LA Progressive, and our longtime friend and contributor to the LA Progressive, Peter Larman. And Peter always really blesses us with his words of wisdom. And he did that again this week in a piece that he has written uh, called Far Left Fever Dreams. Will the New York Times set the terms? And I neglected to say that Peter is a former pastor and used to live here in LA County, and now he's on the East Coast. So that's how we met. But
My
anyway,
loss. My loss.
yeah, my loss, our loss, big loss. We miss seeing you, but at least we can see you this way.
So, so, so
It's
I,
second best, but it's worth doing. Thank you.
yeah, it's kind of nice. So this article is very interesting. One part of that interested me was this dichotomy between liberals or religious liberals and liberationists. Can you tell me what's going on with that?
Yeah, I ended up talking about that distinction because to me that's a distinction that matters. I mean, historically, religious liberals were in the driver's seat in terms of discourse and popular opinion. They were the people who, mostly East Coast people, who pronounced what was right and what was wrong, and they included people like Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was a Presbyterian, who was then hired by John D. Rockefeller to run the Riverside Church. In fact, the Riverside Church was kind of built for him. And people lined up on the streets to listen to people like that. Reinhold Niebuhr was a famous liberal until he wasn't. He became a sort of a I guess we call neoliberal because he was like, well, wait a minute, war is a bad thing, and we need to fight them, however, because evil is real. Liberals thought that everything's going to get better and stuff, um, and they allied themselves with progressive forces, and that was fine. But they were basically uh, the religious equivalent of the sort of moderate Democrats who subscribe to what we sometimes call the TikTok school of history. That is to say, it's going to go back. The Supreme Court did terrible things, but didn't do everything bad, and now we'll control the Congress, and things will get okay. And the liberationist view is that normal in this country has never been good enough. Far from it, because of this, the stain of slavery and settler colonialism and the violence that's baked into it. So yes, we should use the electoral process where we can defensively, especially now, but we shouldn't think that going back to the so-called normal is acceptable. So the liberationists are people who kind of cut loose from the establishment, took a lot of risks, allied themselves against Reagan's dirty wars in Central America. Um, uh, you know, the people who took direct action against nuclear arms and actually had more impact than we think they had. They've been on the margins, but they've made a dramatic difference. I identify with that side of things because you know the liberal establishment then and now was a sort of hollow establishment.
Yeah.
I hope I'm making some kind of
No, you
sense.
Yeah.
absolutely, you are absolutely
Yeah,
making sense. So if I were to use different words and you tell me if I'm correct,
yeah,
you're making a distinction between the type of and for lack of better words, I will say the type of Christianity that hope to maintain the status quo. That
yeah,
yeah, just as long as we didn't have people openly being lynched, or just be nice, just go to church on Sunday, don't ruffle any feathers, don't really
Right.
get engaged politically. But what you're talking about is, and tell me if this is correct, you're talking about liberation theology,
yeah.
where
That's right. Yeah, a radical view of creating solidarity from the bottom up. Yeah,
right, right. So, I read Frederick Douglass's autobiography, and he talked about Christianity and how it was practiced around him. And it was just awful what was done in the name of Christianity. One of his first experiences with what can only be called torture was he was like 4 or 5 years old, and he was in the kitchen of the master's house, and he heard the master coming down. I think he was in the kitchen to try to get a treat, and he hid in a closet, and there was a young Black woman who was going to give him the treat, but the master came in there because he wanted to rape her. And she was trying to fight off the rape, and then he ripped her clothes off and beat her with a whip until the blood ran down her back. And Frederick Douglass recounts this, and this memory from when he was 4 or 5 years old that never left him. And
Yeah.
this man was known as a strong Christian in his
Right.
community.
That's right. Right. Absolutely respectable. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, he wouldn't have been a liberal, but the Northern liberals, I'm thinking, for example, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Ralph
Mm.
Waldo Emerson, they thought slavery was a terrible, terrible thing, but they didn't want to live with Black people. They did not want Black people around. They wanted Black people to go back to Africa. In fact, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you recall, that people emigrate to Canada and then they emigrate to Africa. The idea that they would stay here as free people living among, people like the Beechers. No, that's not happening. And
Yeah.
and broadly speaking, as you say, they would speak out against the worst of lynchings and stuff like that, but they didn't. They didn't fight to end segregation. I mean, they just didn't. There's no evidence for that. I mean, these are very broad strokes. These are very, very broad strokes. I mean, the way I got to this liberal liberationist distinction was thinking about the Democrats and the fact that the New York Times is apparently horrified that ESA types are winning. That this is going to, so they use this strong language, far left, which is a familiar trope. We can have nice progressives, but we cannot have far left people because that's dangerous. That is too upsetting to the system and finance capital. And it's so interesting to me that the headlines each day now, the person in Colorado who whipped a 12-term member of Congress, DSA person. Here in Providence, the Democratic Socialists just announced a complete slate of people for mayor and city council. Never done that before. We'll see, but if all those people should win, that'll be another, freak out part of the so-called center. I mean, what is the center of the Democratic Party? What is
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think that
Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer.
it's what I've been telling Dick all along since we were dating. I don't really see that much difference between the two parties. If you're looking at the center of the Democratic Party, you're basically looking at what used to be called a Republican. So, but it is important that when we make these distinctions, that we characterize more than just using a different term. So when they say radical left, I don't really see anything radical about universal health care. I don't see anything radical about not saddling college students with debt that they're going to be paying until they're well into their 50s and 60s. I don't see anything radical about providing childcare for working moms. But that tends to be when they say these radical lefties, this is what we're talking about. We think that the American people deserve.
Yeah, it's not Bolshevism we're talking about here. It's sort of like uh, realizing what was close to being realized under, believe it or not, the Truman administration, where where Truman seriously wanted to, sort of advance the New Deal idea. Remember, he didn't run with. I think he did run with Henry Wallace, right? Henry Wallace would have been the left, right? But But Truman still, because there was an actual left back then. Truman still thought absolutely we need to provide universal health care and wanted desperately to advance labor rights. And unfortunately, the Republicans, there was post-war fatigue. The Republicans got control of Congress and they shut that down. Shut that down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hear what Sharon says that mainstream Democrats, and then it was recently one mainstream Democrat got up and very forcefully said, "We are capitalists. We are not socialists." And they are not much different than the Republican Party of Nelson Rockefeller and John Lindsay and 50, 60, 70
There
years
you
of
go.
Peter and I's youth. But the problem is that Republican Party is now the white people's party. They're not, they are far right. They are radical right. I mean, and recent Supreme Court cases, I mean, they've got their hands around the throat of the Supreme Court, and they're in the process of really changing our democracy and attempting to steal an election. So I hear that. I mean, uh, yep, I hear that.
Well, I don't want to be misunderstood. Ethically, not to vote to prevent, an authoritarian takeover, which is sort of a slow rolling authoritarian takeover, is unacceptable. So I will vote for anybody who will block that. But I'm not going to be deceived into thinking that assuming we can stave off the worst, that we're going to be okay because these folks aren't interested at all in looking at the corporate state problem. They're not interested at all in looking at the trillion-dollar plus military problem. They're not really interested in dismantling mass incarceration. It was like, oh, we tried that and that was bad, and that was in the bad woke period. And let these woke people run away. I mean, this repeats again and again and again and again.
It sure
Um,
does. And in your article, you invoke the names of Jane Addams, Emma Goldman, Eugene Debs. And so what do these figures reveal about the political traditions that we've just sort of let fall by the wayside and they've almost been forgotten to history?
well, I was talking really about lazy journalists. I call them slugs who were preceded by other slugs and who couldn't, who even then couldn't kind of distinguish between a figure like Debs, who was a committed Christian, kind of a Christian socialist, and somebody like Big Bill Haywood, who really did want to, he wanted a European style revolution. I'm not to disparage Haywood. I like to think of the people in the past who were pilloried for being left, but who got a whole lot done and who should be remembered fondly. Victor Berger and that German socialist element, which was very strong in Wisconsin because so many Germans emigrated to Wisconsin. They were really really good people who said, yeah, really should. In fact, to this day, I believe Milwaukee has a system where all the buildings are heated by underground steam. It's like a 21st century energy saving idea, but they were like, well, why shouldn't we do that? And why shouldn't the city, provide that and provide wraparound services, so to speak? Yeah, really, I kind of brought up these figures to be reminded that journalism has never been mainstream journalism has never been reliable. I mean, particularly the New York Times. The New York Times never, for example, apologized for its terrible attack on Martin Luther King when he turned against Vietnam, and going back, a century before that, when Reconstruction was dismantled, the New York Times was right there saying, "That's right, that was a complete failure, and Black people cannot be trusted with power." Yeah. So there's a how to say this? There is a keeper. It's almost like the newspaper desperately wants to be accepted as part of the old aristocracy and cannot ever firing Nicole Hannah-Jones. Cannot accept much deviation from the tried and true.
So the traditional game, as we know, has been for the establishment press, like the New York Times and its brothers, and Main Street Democrats, whose principal role I feel is to keep their offices. They say, well, they may like things like Medicare for all or these far left programs, but you'll never get them passed. You'll never get them elected. And now here comes Mamdani and the young lady, what's her name, Melat Kiros, and a whole bunch of Democratic socialists. And I wonder if we can thank Donald Trump for making things bad enough and energizing people enough that they might really look at some fundamental change. Or is that just another one of Dick's pipe dreams?
No, it's not a dick pipe dream. And I mean, demographically, if the Democratic Party wants to have a future, and this again is rattling the foundations, they've got to give up their you know, uncritical alignment with whatever Israel wants to do, and and absolutely need to understand young people aren't, the younger people are not sort of having it. They're just not having it anymore. Whether that can happen in the next cycles is an open question. I mean, the amount of money that's going to be poured into crushing these people is, it's already, we saw that in that one district in New York where $25 million was spent, one congressional district. Yeah, it's going to be pouring in to, again, hold down the fort, right? Prevent this radical takeover of the establishment.
So I'm a inveterate reader of the New York Times, now online. LA Times, since it moved to El Segundo, is kind of useless. But the thing I've struggled for the last several years with the New York Times is their foursquare apologies and support for Netanyahu and the Zionist program in Israel, and equating it at times with an attack on Jews, which then gives them an excuse to have that. But it seems now that Americans are turning against Netanyahu and what it's done to what the Israeli army has done to Palestine, and maybe the Democrats can now back away from that a little bit.
Well, they are. I mean, realistically, they are. And it's making a lot of people really uncomfortable. That person who went down to defeat the long-serving congresswoman in Colorado described herself as a firm supporter of Israel. The primary in the state of Michigan is really, really interesting. Really interesting because it's a three-way race. Talking about the Senate seat, there's a three-way race, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Abdul El-Sayed is sort of in the lead, and he is clearly, radical change. And then there's a competitor whose name escapes me, Stevens, I think, who is heavily, heavily backed by the AIPAC group, and these will. In real time, in the near future, we'll see how this table is played. But I think that it's the Democrats have to detach from that Netanyahu, or not. It's not even Netanyahu. It's Israel, right or wrong. I mean, the thing we keep forgetting: if Netanyahu falls, it's not going to shift to the old labor, the people we remember fondly like Rabin. Those people are gone. They don't exist. It's going to go to even further right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But it may go further right without support of the Democratic Party or Democrats who want to get elected, and that's kind of the key point to me,
That's the
because
key point.
it made it a struggle at times to read the New York Times. I mean, I liked a lot of the coverage, but then there would always be an apologia for how many ever Palestinians Israel had bombed to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People should not. I have friends. I can name them, but I won't. I have friends who are so obsessed with the New York Times that they read every single comment. They're on the comments and so forth. I mean, it's kind of like obsession is the only word for it. I'm not like that. I read it because of they still have the biggest international core of people all over the world. Their international reporting at least serves a purpose. May I say, I read I read the arts sections. I read cooking. Yeah, I mean, it's you kind of can't get away from it. But I don't stay up all night obsessing about their orientation. I do know that there must be. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the editorial board meetings. That's all I have to say. Those are super secret, of course, but I'd like to know what they're talking about, who's up, who's down in
So,
that
so, so
that
Sharon
room.
stays up all night playing the New York Times puzzles.
That's not true.
Yeah.
So,
Well, not all night. You get a couple hours sleep in there.
okay.
That's
So, in my lifetime, I've watched both Democratic leadership and Republican leadership sit by while the incarceral state has grown from, I think when I was a kid, we may have had about 300,000 people incarcerated to over 2 million now. The unhoused community has exploded in my lifetime. In LA County, at any given time, there could be 90,000 people who are sleeping out on the streets. Militarism, what do we have? 800 bases across the
800,
globe.
800. Yep.
Yeah. Mhm. Deindustrialization, when I was a kid, cities like Detroit and other cities, there was the car manufacturing and other manufacturing industry that helped to build America's middle class, gone now. And in addition to losing these industries and increasing the carceral state, at the same time, we've cut welfare and support systems, and the safety net is just full of holes. So, how much responsibility do you put on the Democratic Party for these? I think this establishes the foundation why Dick and I used to have these arguments about me saying it doesn't matter to me whether you're Democratic or Republican. The state of affairs is still the state of affairs.
Well, the pivot point, we've talked about this before. In a way, the pivot point is 1980 and Reagan, because the old right didn't like the 60s, to put it bluntly, at all, and saw trouble ahead. And Lewis Powell wrote that thing in 1971, and these people got organized and said, they said, before there was ever Donald Trump, they said, we're going to make America great again. Or they didn't use that language. They said, we're going to take America back again for us. So they attacked the labor movement brutally, and they had the whip hand because they could source, products from all over the world. And they loosened the regulatory state. And Reagan was their person. And there was a kind of, Reagan revolution. He popularized this idea that you don't need a handout. That those days are over. And along comes Clinton. Carter was the sort of the last of the old school people who still held on to the FDR vision. But then along comes Clinton, and he's running on remember attacking Sister Souljah and all this kind of stuff. He's running basically as a Reagan light person,
Yeah.
and let's the Republican Congress, let's Newt Gingrich punk him out. I mean, and so the language I use is lent them a hand. I mean, the Democrats lent the Republican program a hand in terms of the whole range of issues. I disappointed my congregation in New York. This was not a wise thing politically for me to do, but I really disappointed them when I hit Clinton really hard from the pulpit on his embrace of the World Trade Organization and his engineering of the NAFTA deal, because not because I was loyal to my old friends at the UAW, but I could see plainly where this was going to go. It was a big handout to the corporate state.
Right.
And when he went along with this welfare reform thing, which basically said, "Oh, good luck. I mean, no more cash assistance. Everybody's got to work." And that is a Republican thing that is now back in terms of people having to, even if you're disabled, seriously disabled, having to work to stay on Medicaid. This is gonna hit big time the next couple of years.
That's
Um,
Yeah, I'd like to
I don't know.
underscore.
I don't know what the impact is in California, but even in Massachusetts, 125,000 people are going to go off the Medicaid rolls, and the state's going to be forced to do that, even though they don't want to.
Yeah, I wanted to underscore Sharon's saying about deindustrialization, because Peter and I are both originally long ago from the Midwest. And the industries weren't only in Detroit and Chicago
right.
and New York, they were in every small town, every
Yeah, in the South.
medium-sized town, all across the Midwest in the South. And what happened is those plants failed and the work was taken to Mexico or China, leaving behind a whole generation of people who became MAGA, I think. And that's kind of the point of MAGA is they were actually screwed, and they had to trade in a job their dad had at the local packing plant or steel finishing mill for a job at McDonald's. And then coupled with that was Peter's favorite agricultural secretary, Earl Butz, who told farmers, go big or go home. And they erased the family farms from broad swaths of the Middle West. And again, families that then either had to go work for the boss of the farm or move to the big cities where they were cogs in the machine. And the Democrats had a hand in that too.
Absolutely. That's what you
Well,
and I argue about. But then sadly, the MAGA group, they were duped into believing that their salvation was going to come from these corporate wealthy people who have no, clearly, Donald Trump, he revealed his finances and has made more than $1 billion. I don't know if it's 1.2 or 2.1
Two,
billion dollars.
2.2
$2.2 billion.
billion, 2.2 billion minimum. That's in this term, Sharon. My
Right.
God, this is the best job he's ever had.
But the nice thing is, at least a few of them will get jobs taking care of the reflecting pool.
I mean, even Barron, his 19-year-old
Yeah.
son, is now worth $150 million. He was worth zero. $150 million.
That poor little darling.
What?
That poor little darling. Hey, just to continue what you were saying, Dick. I can never get over this. So a lot of people, again, who don't have no clue what it's like to be in a small town that's lost it's the source of income, and it's just sitting there. Um, Along comes Hillary Clinton and describes these people as deplorables.
Yes.
Um, like, well, they were just racist anyway, so they had it coming. I mean, this is not the way
Yeah.
to build a big tent.
No, not at all. Not at
So
all.
so now, it's excruciating for me to think about this, but it is absolutely true. The Democratic Party, this is one weird thing about democratic socialism. The Democratic Party uh, is not the party of the Workers' Party has become the Republican Party, which is a weird thing for people like us
Right.
who remember when it used to be the other way around, the Farmer Labor Party and so forth. That infrastructure is gone. It's gone. Well, we're not gonna leave ourselves in the dumps here, because I think it's a good thing that young people are not. The New York Times can rant and rave all it wants about socialism and far left. Young people don't care about that. They absolutely do not care. Socialism is not, the kiss of death at all. A ton of younger people say, "Yeah, I'm a socialist."
That's right, they do. But I think it's also important that we don't just use the labels, that we talk about the meaning behind the labels. And it's one of the
Of
things
course.
that one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because the things that we're talking about are not radical. They're just normal things that everybody wants and needs. We all need health care, we all need childcare, we all need opportunities for education and to own homes, and we need rights and we need collective bargaining. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you. I mean, if we, I always used to say this, and I still think it if we turned into a Sweden on a bigger scale, would that be the worst thing in the world?
Absolutely not.
I think it would be wonderful.
Yeah.
No.
I wouldn't have
All
to
right,
fear
friends.
aging.
Good talking to you, Peter. We'll look forward to the next time.
All righty.
All
So
right.
long.
Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.